turning the page to your next phase of life when it's time to retire should be an exhilarating chapter filled with new adventures and possibilities. Because after all, you work to live. You don't live to work. However, for some men, it's more challenging to make that life transition more seamless. A significant portion of American men are concerned about the implications of retirement, according to a Yahoo Finance survey. By a clip of 44%, men are more concerned about their lifestyle after retirement as opposed to death. The trepidation is not only financial, according to the Nasdaq, with more men being concerned about boredom and a loss of purpose in their next phase of life. For my friend Michael K., he spends his days helping men navigate life transitions. Kay is an ex-financial planner turned certified life coach who says life will have a tendency to kick you in the butt if you let it happen to you. The transition from work to the next chapter of your life can often be filled with fear and peril and a necessity to redefine your values. Kay says that his life trajectory from musician to CPA and now to coach has experienced a winding road, and he's committed now more than ever to share what he's learned and help men redefine how they view the next phase of life when their working days have reached their inevitable conclusion. I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. Michael, if you're ready, my friend, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn how you help men transition to life after retirement, my friend. Great to see you, and happy Thursday to you, my friend.
Thank you, Kevin. Same to you.
Absolutely. So, Michael, I'm wondering if we can start our conversation by asking you, why do you think men struggle to adjust to retirement, my friend?
You know, Kevin, I think the one of the biggest issues is that, we identify who we are with what we do. So we become our career, we become our job title, we become identified with the things that we do instead of being more in touch with who we are beyond what we do. So the guy who is the doctor sees himself as the doctor or the executive or the business owner. And so the challenge is to say, okay, well, who am I when I'm no longer my job?
Yeah, absolutely. And, my friend, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today was I know that you work with men to really create that identity after retirement. We've all heard the saying, you live to work, you work to live, but you don't live to work, my friend. And it's one of the reasons that outside of hosting this podcast and doing some motivational speaking work. I also volunteer for both the art gallery and Habitat for Humanity in my hometown, and it's important to me to have a distinctive identity outside of work, my friend. So, what do you think is the core ingredients to creating that identity outside of the office, my friend?
That's such a good question, Kevin, and I think we we sometimes lose touch with what we value. We sometimes, what are our core values? What are the things that make up who we are as humans beyond the thing that helps us support ourselves and our families? So, those core values like creativity or um, in being courageous or being curious or being a learner or caring about other people, the things that we value. And I think we lose touch with that as we progress in our careers because we're so hyper focused on our jobs, on our careers that and it's also becomes comfort level. So we don't stop to think about, well, who are we really? And am I living in alignment with what I really care about, with who I am?
Yeah, you say navigating life after retirement comes with a new sense of bravery, especially for men. And I'm wondering if you can tell me why, my friend.
Well, I think, it because it takes a willingness to go outside of your comfort zone. And I think that does take courage. We're really comfortable doing what we do day in and day out because we're so used to it. And now all of a sudden, especially as we get older, the ability or the desire to change and to adapt or adopt new habits or new ways of living becomes more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also said that men are adopted to a outdated sort of style of masculinity, my friend. And as we've already discussed, defining your identity after retirement can take on many facets for many people. For myself, even though I'm not retired, Michael, I always struggle with the whole idea of when a email, for example, comes in to an inbox. I'm a recovering perfectionist, Michael. I know that it doesn't always have to be answered as soon as it gets into the inbox. So I'm curious to ask you about the outdated part of the masculinity piece, but I'm also curious to get your opinion about how you think we create that new exciting inbox once we reach retirement. What do you think is the first step there, my friend?
I think the first step is to take a breath, is to really, you've got to kind of detoxify what you've done and understand that, you've been doing what you're doing for decades and you've been going from novice to mastery at each level of your development. Now you're getting, when you leave retirement and you've reached the pinnacle of your mastery, that next day you're back at novice. Excuse me. And and so the idea is to recognize that, hey, I'm a beginner at this and it's okay. I love the fact that you brought up the idea of perfectionism. And believe me, I struggle with that to this day. Uh, and this idea that, what, especially in this part of my life, that it doesn't have to be perfect. And and what is fun? And I was talking to someone the other day and I said, there's nothing at stake. If you go try something and you're terrible at it, but you have fun with it, there's nothing at stake. If you're bad at it, you're not going to like go to jail. You're not going to be humiliated by the world. You're not, no one's going to, put you on Instagram and laugh at you because you weren't good at pottery or painting or learning a language or playing a musical instrument. You're just playing. We've forgotten how to play. right? And just for the sheer joy of playing, the sheer joy of experiencing, the sheer joy of experimenting with something new.
Yeah, I know that's one of the primary reasons you created on Chapter X to get men to think differently, my friend. So tell me about the venture and how it works, my friend, because it's a really exciting concept. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about it.
Sure. As I spent the biggest part of my career. I was originally an accountant in my earliest days of my career and a CPA, and uh, I transitioned into financial services uh, and then I kind of morphed that into my own financial life planning firm that I created with multiple advisors in various locations as fee-only advisors. And what I noticed a lot was men especially had such difficulty in what that next step was after retirement, after after retirement, into retirement. And so I said there needs to be there's really nothing there or not there's not a lot there for men to just be able to talk about it. So I decided as I was transitioning out of career, I sold my practice to my younger partner, and I said, and I became a certified life coach. And I said, gee, maybe I can help other people in this way because my whole career has been about helping people. And so what I did was I created this community for men who are transitioning to life after career, and I do a monthly Zoom meeting. I do a podcast every 2 weeks. I write three blog pieces a week. That's out there, and I do this for no charge. I do this because it's a passion. Uh, I do a little bit of coaching. I've created a workshop to be able to bring to groups of men, or a keynote for audiences who want to understand why this transition is so difficult, and the workshop to help them. So it's not really a for-profit venture. I charge a little bit for coaching, but everything else I do for Chapter X is just part of my passion.
It's important to find that passion and purpose in life, isn't it?
For sure. That's really what it's all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, selfishly, Michael, I'm going to ask you a question that serves sort of my own self interest and curiosity. So, outside of hosting this podcast, Michael, I talk to businesses about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities. And it's important to me because I was born with one, and I found out at 9 years old that I wouldn't be able to walk without the assistance of a walker or a wheelchair because of the severity of my cerebral palsy. But I have dedicated my adult life to advocating for the full inclusion of folks with disabilities in the workforce. And I'm curious, both because of your life experience and your background in financial planning, about your perspective on the positive benefits of hiring folks with disabilities and what that can bring to the workforce. I'm curious to get your answer there.
Yeah, I think it's I hate to say it's that it's a given that it should be uh, something that is vitally important in our society, to include uh, members of society with disabilities that are that are qualified to and educated and trained to do that kind of work in every aspect of our life. There should be no barriers, as long as there's the ability to perform. Hell, I mean, we are all, we're all joined together under the same sun. And I just think it's vitally important. And I couldn't uh, um, encourage people with disabilities to get trained and certified as financial planners, uh, and be able to take their knowledge and ability out to help other people, because that's really what it's about.
Yeah, the line I usually use, Michael, is that people with disabilities are natural problem solvers, right? They always have to solve problems, and they have to pay taxes too. So we might as well get them employed, right?
And the fact is, and it's very interesting as I'm thinking about this, you know, in financial planning, or especially financial life planning, which is what we did, which was really getting to the heart and values of people. And talking about money is uncomfortable. It's for I don't know that I've ever spoken to someone who is really comfortable with money. And the fact that someone with disability who's gone through these challenges, through their own personal challenges, they understand discomfort. And I think that they would be able to hold space really well in that discussion.
I agree with you, and I thank you for showing your perspective. And I'm curious to now get your perspective on a study that was published last year by the Retirement Institute that reported that 60% of retired men struggle to find their new sense of purpose after leaving the workforce. And I'm curious to ask you, the first week of retirement, what do you think men should be focused on as they sort of transition into their next chapter? And what do you think of those findings about 60% of men struggling to find their identity after retirement? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm surprised that I think it's higher than 60%, but if we leave it at 60%, that's fine. And I think the fact is that what people don't do, and let me take a step backwards, Kevin, because there's various people who go into retirement, those who go in by their choice and those who go in when it's not their choice. And I believe that they each one has to look at this very differently. The people who have a choice and say, I am retiring next, a year from now. Well, there's a lot to think about. What is it that I need to do? What are some of the things that what messes need to be cleaned up? What do I need to do in my family situation, in my home situation? There's so many transitions. All of a sudden, you're going to be home, and if you're married or partnered, your partner or your spouse isn't used to you being home 7 days a week. So there has to be conversations. What is life going to look like? Communication is really important. The other things that people need to think about are things like, okay, what gives me meaning and purpose? What might be fun? What can I explore? Who are my people? Because once you leave work, that social engagement that you have at work is now gone. So who are the people that I'm going to hang with? Who are the people that are part of my support, and who can I be a support for? So those people who have the time to prepare for retirement should be training, just like anything else, should be training towards it. I know one of the men in Chapter X, great story. He retired, and he was retiring, and he started by lessening his work by like 1 day a week. So, and then he went to 2 days a week, and then he went to 3 days a week. You know what I'm saying? So he just made it so his work time was less and less and less until he finally felt prepared. And he has a very defined list of what he wants his life to look like. He talks about we talk about our values. What do I value? So how do you align what you value with your activities? So for example, being in a personal way, I care about helping people. So one of the things that I like to do is I do some volunteer work. And so that is in alignment. I value creativity. So I've gone back into playing music that I haven't done in 50 some odd years. So it's a matter of aligning who you are with the things that you do. For people who lose their job, then the question is, there's also, I'm going to also need to backtrack one bit, is you need to know that you're financially okay. Okay. You need to be working with a planner who's going to give you good information. And I recommend everyone works with a fee-only planner who doesn't get paid by the products they sell, but by getting paid for the work that they do that has nothing to do with the products that they sell. And because you want someone who is objective. And so working with the planners, because you have to match up. What does it cost me to live? Do I have enough money to live? Do I need to downsize? There's so many questions and so many issues that need to be addressed. And frankly, 99.9% of the people don't have the qualifications to answer these questions by themselves. And that's okay. And people feel badly when they don't have all the money answers, but why should they? That's not their jobs. It's not their career, their training. So they should be working with a professional who can help guide them. So for people, you need to know that your financial life is secure, and then and that you have security, and then you can start to explore and expand your vista into other areas. If you've just been let go and say sorry, then if you're financially okay, then once you get your feet back under you, and I know lots of people who said, okay, we're reducing our workforce, 30 days, and here's your package, and blah blah blah, and you're out the door. It's a big blow because they weren't ready for it. So it takes planning and it takes time to really, emotionally kind of deal with that transition.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the emotional part later in our discussion, but I also want to explore the idea of, Michael, I'm a big believer in finding your inner center, which means for me when everything sort of caves in life, or if you want to start a new chapter in life, and you're not sure on how to begin it. I always tell people go back to their inner center, what really brings them fulfillment and passion. And as you mentioned, for you it's music, my friend, and I know you've also dabbled in writing fiction books and creating characters, my friend. So I'm also curious to ask you about the idea of a new sense of adventure and how your new adventures are going, my friend.
Yeah, Kevin, I was a classically trained trumpet player growing up, and I came from a musical family. Both my parents were professional musicians, and my uncle was also a professional musician, and so music was just part of my life. And I decided, and it's a long story that I won't bore you with today, but of why I decided to not pursue music as a career, and I put my trumpet in the case and didn't open it for 50 years. And one day I was having a conversation with a friend who happens to be a world-renowned musician and music educator. And he looked at me and says, well, why can't you just play and have fun with it? And I kind of looked at him and I thought, wow, that's a new idea because I was always driven to perfection. So the idea of playing for fun and taking the perfection out of it was really a challenge. But I met the challenge. I started taking lessons again, and I'm playing with an adult big band, and I'm just having a ton of fun. It is very fulfilling, and yeah, it's just a gas to get in there with a bunch of people who are ranging from age 25 or 24 to 78, playing jazz and just learning and having fun.
Well, that certainly is a wide spectrum, isn't it?
It is a very wide spectrum, and but it's great because you're interacting with people from different professions, different backgrounds, different points, and it's just great. It's very enriching.
Well, new perspectives also bring new adventures, don't they?
They sure do.
Yeah, and Michael, I'm curious to get your definition of how you would define a successful transition once you leave the office and go full time into retirement, my friend. So, how would you define a successful transition into retirement?
Yeah, I think part of a successful transition is not pining away of who you used to be, or living in past glories. A successful transition is one where you get to craft how you spend your day. What is enough in your calendar? What's too much? What do you say no to? Um,
I
I think
struggle with that, Michael.
I know, Kevin. I struggled with that my entire career. And I would saying no, you might as well just cut off one of my fingers or something, because I hated saying no, and I paid the price by being overextended
Mhm.
and having to make decisions around. I had, in my career, I have two children and a wife, and everything else, but saying no to anyone was really, really difficult. But what I've learned in Chapter X is that if it doesn't bring me joy, if it is not aligned with my values, the answer is a flat no. And I actually wish I learned this earlier.
Yeah, well, the more sort of lived capital that we amass in life, the more lessons we learn. Isn't it? That the truth?
Hopefully, I'll say hopefully with underline and exclamation point, because not everyone does. A lot of people struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Michael, I want to return now to the idea of social isolation in retirement and really sort of aligning the new values in life once we turn the page into our second or third chapter in life after work. Because, as you mentioned before, a lot of men identify their value in life with their job or their contributions professionally. So I'm curious to ask you, what do you think it means to exhibit new emotional or social capital once you retire? What are your thoughts there?
Ah, such a good question. Um, it takes it takes a level of courage to step out of your comfort zone in order to create new relationships, to come to grips with the fact that old relationships might not serve you anymore. And I think that in retirement, we need to be looking at life with a whole new set of eyes. I'm a big believer in that, as we age, our focal point, our focus gets very narrow to what we do for a living, to our social circles, to our activities. And if you put that kind of in juxtaposed to how we were when we were young, when our lenses were wide open, we were open to all experiences, to all social interactions, to so much that was out there. We were curious. We were open-hearted, open-minded, hopefully. And now they're close. So we need to really focus on how do we reopen that to be more at peace with the fact that, okay, it's different, but that doesn't mean it can't be better. Um, I remember, standing in a coffee shop and listening to these old guys sitting around grumbling about their life and how they hated their life and how they wish they were still working, and they're sitting around grumble, 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 and I'm going, oh my Lord, this is terrible. What a terrible way to live your life. That sitting around and having this bitch session uh, every day with the same group of guys who were talk about sports and maybe going out to play a round of golf, but they weren't happy in their lives, and I thought that was just so sad, because I think they lost touch with who they are inside. what they value, what they can bring to the world. I think this time in Chapter X is a time when you can give back to others what your some of your wisdom, some of your time, just by by being there with other people to be there in support of them, or have them support you, or just listening and not having to be the boss, be the professional, be whatever you were, but just be a human.
It's an interesting and sometimes uh, um, winding transition, isn't it?
It is. It is definitely an evolution, and let's not forget that excuse me, that as we age, we're also faced with potentially more health challenges
Hmm.
that we didn't have in our earlier days. So you have to face that fact, like, where am I right now? What's my health like? What's my what are the other things in my life that are uh, that consume me, or that I'm responsible for? And what are the things? What happens when I'm not feeling well, or I'm faced with a medical situation? And how do I shift and change? I remember talking with men who would say, well, what are you going to do when you stop working? Oh, I'm going to play golf. And I would say, like, okay, like 7 days a week, 30 to every day, every week, every month, every year. And they would kind of look at me, and I'm like, well, what happens if, you need a hip replacement, or or your back goes out? What are you going to do then? Are you going to sit on the couch and watch reruns, or binge Netflix? What's going to give you meaning? What's going to be purposeful? There's nothing wrong with golf, although I'm not a golfer. But if that's what your passion is, okay, I have nothing to say about it, whether you're playing pickleball, or whether you're you know whatever you're doing. But if all you see is, if all you see is, the old saying is if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All right. So, it's like, how do you open up your toolbox and see what else is there to use, to explore, and live a life that has meaning? I think another big issue is thinking about legacy. How do I want to be
Hmm.
remembered? And to whom?
Yeah, those are certainly questions worth pondering, my friend. And I want to go back to something you said earlier because, our friends at the National Institute of Retirement Security, my friends say that over 50% of American men are afraid to retire because they're convinced that they won't have enough money to retire. So, from both a financial and personal perspective, Michael, I'm curious to get your thoughts on those findings and ask you, my friend, what do you think is the right time for men to retire?
Okay, there's a lot in that question. The first part is, when people who are insecure about, whether they have enough to retire, the next question is, retire how? To do what? You know, the I had a client who was a director for a national television show, and he came in one day and he was just completely, like, done with it. And he throws his retirement paper that had his director's pension on it, throws it on the table, and says, "Do I have enough to retire?" And I picked up the papers and I kind of ordered them because they got scattered, and I turned them over. And he looked at me, goes, I can't stand it anymore. I want to know if I can retire." And I'm saying, well, what are you going to do when you retire? If you say you want to travel, well, what does that mean? Are you going to take, like, day trips? Or are you going to take, like, the Queen Mary around the world? They're both travel, but they have different price tags. Are you going to live in your house? Are you going to downsize? What are the things that go into your retirement? So how can I know whether you have enough to retire until you think about what retirement means to you? and what is included in that basket. Then I can tell you. And when we got up from our meeting, and he was kind of this kind of hard-boiled, kind of gruff guy, and I went to shake his hand, and he puts his arms around me and he gives me a hug. And he'd never given me a hug before, and I'm a hugger. I believe me. And and he said, "Thank you." He goes, "This was the most important meeting I've ever had." And because the idea was like, this is the truth. You can't, you have to do your work. You have to think about what your retirement looks like. So if you're not sure whether you have enough, you have to first think about, well, what is it that you want in retirement? How long does it need to last for? How are you going to spend your money? What do your resources look like? And are you working with a qualified planner that can help you navigate all these questions? So those are big ones. Um, I know you asked me the second part of the question. So if I forgive me, but I lost the thread of the second part of your question.
Yeah, the idea of sort of creating a new social identity when you retire, because a lot of people are married to their job. I'm thinking about the old football coach Joe Paterno, who essentially died on the field because he was afraid about his life if he stepped away from coaching. So I'm curious to ask you, as a life coach, how much do you have to sort of not reverse psychology, but make sure that your clients know that their life isn't tied to their work all of the time?
Yeah, I think part of the question before was around, that sense of identity. But the idea is like when you ask when is it the right time to retire, and the answer, because I want to answer that because I think that's an excellent question. There's no definition there. There's no set time. If you're still super passionate about what you do, and you have the energy to do it, I don't, then don't retire. But if you say, you know what, there's more, I see more to life than just doing this, or you know what, this is getting tiring, or I can't keep up the same way. Those are the nudges that it's time to start moving in that direction. So, the social capital side of the conversation, I think is the idea of, you have to know that everything's going to be different. Everything from the relationship with your spouse or partner and your family and what that looks like and how you bring yourself into other situations. I remember going to we were invited to a barbecue, and there was a bunch of retired guys, and all they were doing was talking about, like their old war stories. And I was like, I turned around, I did a 180 and hopped out of there because I was like, I'm not interested in who you were. I'm really kind of interested in who you're becoming. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're just going to talk about who you were, like, who cares? And I wasn't that blunt about it. I just kind of did a 180 and exited. But that was kind of my self-talk was, I can't sit here with that. But I think people need to be honest with themselves. It's like, you know, if you're in a profession where, say, you need manual dexterity to do your job, there's going to come a time when you're not going to have it, or mental acuity, because as we age, our mental acuity can decrease. Our physical acuity can decrease. So it's being self-aware. Hey, am I able to perform at peak now versus how was I a year ago or 5 years ago? What's changed? And I think one of the things, Kevin, that we kind of lack, and I hate to say this because it doesn't really sound good, we lack self-awareness. And to be honest with ourselves, I think it's just blah. It's just a bad day, or it's just, you know, let's be honest with ourselves. You know, Can we do what we did 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 5 years ago? And really take a look at it. Is this true? Am I diminish? Am I seeing some diminishment? So I think a lot of it has to do with I use the expression and people laugh at me when I say it. You got to kiss reality somewhere near the mouth. Okay. You got to kind of be real. Where am I? Is my head still in the game the same way it was a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago? Maybe I should start thinking about how I can transition out. So those are some of the things, and be willing to say, look, I'm not as sharp as I was when I was 35 or 40, but I'm bringing the gifts that I've and the wisdom that I've accumulated to the next part of my life in the best way I can.
Yeah, and you bring up something interesting. I want to build on the idea of passing on the wisdom that you sort of impart on the next generation and taking solace or respect in the fact that your legacy, so to speak, lives on through the people that you mentor at work. And what do you think that would be an easier transition to convince men or anyone in particular to retire? I'm curious to get your thoughts on that concept as well.
Yeah, I listen, I think our responsibility as, older adults is to mentor wherever we have the opportunity to prepare the next generation in whatever way we can. And to leave our wisdom behind in whatever way we can. I think it's vitally important. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's part of our responsibility. And beyond that, it's like I as I said, I'm blessed with two grown children, and I have three granddaughters, and my I feel my responsibility and my love and passion is to spend as much quality time with them as I possibly can, because I don't know what my abilities are going to be 5 years from now or tomorrow. So, or 10, you don't know. So it's like you've got to appreciate what you have now in the moment. Okay, we can always, kick the can forward. Oh, it'll be tomorrow. It'll be next year. It'll be in 10 years. But we might not have those 10 years. And I think what would be beneficial for people to do is to ask themselves, what would I regret if I didn't do this? If I left this world without X, without doing XYZ, experiencing XYZ, giving XYZ, being doing for someone else, would I regret that? The old saying is no one ever regretted on their deathbed. No one ever regretted saying they should have spent more time in the office. You know, they always say I should have spent more time having fun. I should have spent more time with my children or my grandchildren, or with friends, or helping others. Those are the common deathbed statements. But no one ever says, "Gee, I should have spent more time working." How do you want to be remembered?
Mm-hmm.
I had a guest on my podcast a couple of years ago, and he said something so profound. He says, we have the day we're born and the day we die. It's what we do in the dash that matters, right? What we do in between that.
Yeah, the great part about life is the identity of our individual dashes is for us to define. Isn't that the truth?
For sure. Absolutely. But how many people really think about that, Kevin? That they have a day that they were born, the day they die, and how do they use that time in between? How do they value it? It's like when I heard a friend of mine was telling me how one of his neighbors retired, and he was like a big shot, a corporate attorney, huge job, made tons and tons of money, and he sits on the couch and watches TV all day. And I can't think of anything more tragic than that.
Michael, I'll tell you a quick story and then I'll move on. So, 5 years ago, I left a job at the YMCA and I started this podcast because I said to myself that there's only so much Netflix I can watch in a day, right? Because, sometimes creative energy comes in many different ways, doesn't it?
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Michael, I've got one more sort of financial question for you. And then the last third of the podcast, I want to have a little bit of fun with you. And the last financial question for you, Michael, comes from our friends at the AARP that said that over 50% of American men over 50 don't have a retirement savings account, and they don't typically work with a financial advisor when it comes to planning for retirement, my friend. So, the first part of that question is, what do you think about those findings, and are you surprised that it's that high? And what are some questions that men should be asking financial planners as they plan to retire, my friend?
Yeah. It is shocking. But in a way it's understandable that so many people don't have retirement savings. And I think a lot of it is well, there's a lot of different reasons. Some of it is because, if people are in low paying jobs and and they're just trying to survive. Okay, so there's a set of a strata of people in society that are just getting by, and that's just kind of that's it. uh, and they live a very simple existence, and it's unfortunate, but that is the reality. Then there are others who have never understood the connection between their life and money. Because the interesting thing is, Kevin, and if you, I'll be curious to hear your take on this and your experience. But how we think about money comes from how we were raised with money. So for some people, money equals survival. For
Mm-hmm.
some people, who money equals um, buying stuff. For some people, I'll share a very personal story. I was raised in a family where my father grew up in the Depression, in a single parent home. Uh, my mother was 11 years younger. My father hated spending money. My mother loved spending money. And the result was they fought constantly about money. So I grew up believing that money equaled conflict. So even after I got married and my wife would talk to me about money, I would feel this sick feeling in my stomach, and I would push it away. I didn't want to talk about it. And when I came to understand that how we're raised around money sets out kind of our future with how we're going to deal with money. So for people who are not raised with values around money, and I've worked with clients whose parents were of very meager earnings, but they learned how to be really good savers because they learned from their parents to be how the importance of having money for a rainy day, putting money aside. The old saying is like, for every time you get a paycheck, take 5% of it and put it in savings or put it into your retirement account. Something so simple. But in our society, we are so in love with spending. We need to have the newest this and the newest that, and the shiny things become more important than what we really value because we've really never thought about it. We kind of get swept up in it. So it's a very complex issue, and you know, having to break, you have to become aware of it, before you can make changes to it.
Yeah, and just out of transparency, I'll answer your question. For me, money equals flexibility.
Hmm.
What I mean by that is flexibility to have options. You know, money um, isn't everything in life, and I think for the people that are consumed with hoarding money without experiencing life, because as you said uh, earlier, when it comes to retirement, no one ever regrets not spending enough time in the office. And I think the same principle or analogy can be applied to money because once you're gone and you have your final days on earth, you can't take the money with you. So money is important and it should be a top priority, but I don't think money should be every sort of motivating factor in life. And what I meant by flexibility is I meant if you have money and you have the ability to diversify experiences, that's what you should use money for, in my opinion. So I hope that answers the question.
No, I think I think that's wonderful. And you are in touch with what you value,
Hmm.
right? So some people but again, it's like saying, well, I value these experiences, but I don't have money to pay my mortgage. It's like, okay, what's the hierarchy of, kind of the order, the working order? Okay, I have to make sure I take care of my security, that my rent is paid and that I have food on the table. And now my disposable income, after I pay for the lights and the things that have to happen. But now what do I do with the rest of that money? What do I care about? Do I care about retirement? Do I care about experiences? Do I care and how do I cut that money up? In what percentages, and what's right for me to get to the goal that I care, the goals that again, it's like living in alignment with what you value. And there's no such thing as wrong. There's no wrong answer. Throughout my career, we would talk to young clients about their, college planning for their children. And some people would say, "Hey, listen, I don't care if they go to medical school, if they, go to whatever, I'm going to pay for every nickel of everything for as long as they're in school." And other people would say, "You know what? I will pay for their undergraduate education. I don't care where they go." Some would say, "Oh, I'll pay for the cost of a state school." Some would say, "I'm going to pay for, $15,000 a year per year while they're in school. The rest is on them." And I've had other people who said, "No, that's their problem." And there's no wrong answers. So it's the same thing with retirement, with saving, with money in general. What is it that you care about? What do you value? What's important to you? And why is it important?
Absolutely. And, you know, Michael, for you personally, I'm fascinated to ask you, based on your life experience, what do you think it means to take a leap of faith in life? And more generally, as you've gotten older, what do you think it means to authentically have fun in life? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? It's like what's your, I think everyone has a joy meter, right? It's like what lights you up. And for me, so playing music lights me up. Um, and yet I was asked to play with a community band, and I went to a couple of rehearsals, and I didn't particularly care for the music, and I thought that some of the people that I had met there weren't very friendly, and I said, "No, no thanks." So even though it was playing music, it wasn't joyful. So I said no. So I think everyone needs to kind of tune up their joy meter and say, "Hey, how does this light me up?" Whether it's, I'm a reader. I love reading. I have a garden. I have my grandchildren. I have all the different things that I love to write. Is it's doing the things that fill you, that you could say, "Ah, this was wonderful. This was exciting. It was interesting. It was different." Whether some people might be, taking a college class or learning how to play piano or whatever it is that they want to do. And I think that that's the muscle that we need to kind of reinvigorate, that willingness to try something. I had one of my dear friends said she was working, she was helping a lot with her grandchildren, and then she wasn't needed as much. And she said, I don't know what to do. I'm a little bored. And I'm like, well, pick something that might be fun. If you like it, do it again. If you don't like it, try something else. So we need the courage to just keep trying different things until we find what kind of lights up our joy meter.
Absolutely. And, just based on your CPA background, I want to sneak in one other question for in the podcast, my friend. And that's this, talking about inflation and running a business today. And I'm curious about your definition of what it means to have business security in this heightened era of inflation and tariffs and all the rest of the financial uncertainties in America. What do you think it means to have business and financial security today?
Yeah, I don't think it exists. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't think it exists. I think someone who is entrepreneurial needs to always be looking for what's next, how to improve. You can never sit still. You can never, when I created my practice and my firm, it was always trying, testing, doing new things with the expectation that you're not knowing whether it was going to work or not work. And it's just like it's no different than being in Chapter X. You
Mm-hmm.
have to have the courage to try something. I think, for if you're working for a corporation, you have no security. There's no the time when, you're going to work for a company and retire at age 65 and get your gold watch and pension. That doesn't exist anymore. So we have to come to the, face the facts that life is insecure, that no corporation or company is going to just look out for you, and that's why whether you're working for a company or you have your own company, you always need to be keeping your eyes open. You need to be networking, you need to meet people, you need to create relationships, you need to keep learning, you need to see how to improve your skills. I worked with a coach years ago and he called it cash, KASH, your knowledge, uh, abilities, skills, and habits. And you always look to keep improving them. Like, what do I need to get to that next level? And it doesn't matter whether it's you're in your work life or in your Chapter X. The same idea applies. You cannot just sit back and expect people are going to flood into your house, into your room, bring you joy, and you're just going to sit there and just absorb it like, like a flower absorbing sunlight. You're you need to be active, and you need to be the conductor of your life orchestra.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I'm going to end the podcast this way. I'm reminded of what Pat Sajak, the old host of Wheel of Fortune, said when he announced his retirement. And he said, it's better to leave a year too early than stay a year too late. And I'm curious, as you reflect on your life and your work as a life coach and financial planning, your thoughts on that notion of knowing when to retire from sort of an emotional, psychological perspective without overstaying your welcome, and how that is intertwined with your legacy, my friend. Fred, what are your thoughts there?
So yeah, for personal on a very personal level, I love the firm that I created, my colleagues, my employees, my clients, the relationships that I've had. I valued them dearly. But I also recognized that I got to the point where I'd been doing this and there was nothing new for me. I felt like the juice was gone. So I said, you know what? It's time to hand the keys to my younger partner. And he's very capable, competent, smart, way smarter than I. And I said, you know what? I've got other mountains to climb. So I I was I was happy to, yet after 4 or 5 months in retirement, I kind of hit the wall of depression because I really hadn't grieved the loss of something that I had built, that I had created out of my own guts and courage and guts and stupidity. And it took me time to kind of reestablish a direction for myself. And I was grateful that I had the men in Chapter X and I wrote about it. I bled out all over the page because, as I said, I write, three blog pieces a week, and I wrote about how terrible I was feeling. And then and my family and the love and support that I got. And it's just like, to thine own self be true, right? Is you got to ask those deep questions and then have faith that you're getting back an honest answer. I'm thrilled with my life. I feel completely blessed. And for those who I get to speak to, coach for, uh, interact with, the friends I've made, it just couldn't be a bigger blessing. And right now I'm in the throes of writing a book about Chapter X, and I've asked some of the men in the community to offer their retirement stories and their willingness to share their stories, which is also on the podcasts. To me, is just, I mean, I'm just getting back in multiplication, multiplied love and support. And but you have to throw it out, right? You have to give yourself out into the universe and say, you know, I'm just going to do the best I can every day.
Yeah, because we only have one life to live, right? So we might as well maximize our dash, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. So, Michael, finally tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
So they can find me on the website, which is www.michael Michaelf as in Frank KAY.com. They can also contact me directly at MK. It's the initials MK at michaelfk.com. And if they want to sign up for the blogs or listen to the podcast, they can do it right there on the website. If they're interested in coaching, they can contact me through there. Or if they're interested in speaking or having a workshop, they can contact me through there. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm wherever. I'm not a huge social media guy, but I'm just trying to put good stuff out there. The podcasts are on the website, but they're also on Spotify and on Apple and wherever you listen to podcasts. It's called Chapter X with Michael K. And yeah, I invite men to climb aboard. We do our monthly Zoom meeting, and just be able to come on and chat. And we don't talk about sports. We don't talk about politics. We talk about real stuff.
Well, I think if more people adopted that philosophy, we would be in a much better place. Would you agree with that?
I hope that's true. I that's all I could do, Kevin, is hope that I'm heading in the right direction.
Well, that's half the battle in life, isn't it?
Sure is.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, I have to tell you, I find you to be a fascinating person, and I found this to be an exhilarating conversation, my friend. I want to thank you for the good work that you're doing to give men purpose and identity post-retirement, and for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon. It's most appreciated, my friend.
It's my honor, Kevin.